Good morning, everyone. Our scripture reading today is from Matthew 5. We're going to read verses 33 to 37. So if you have your Bibles, I'd encourage you to follow along. So Matthew 5, starting in verse 33. This is Jesus talking on his Sermon on the Mount. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear on an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." So back in my job, I'm trying to think of how far back this was. I lose track of years now that I'm getting older. Probably 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. I was working away and I was getting really busy, but then I got my appointment to get my wisdom teeth removed. So those appointments sometimes aren't scheduled until short notice. So I got that. And I told a client before I knew this that I was going to get his work done by the end of the week. So it was earlier in the week, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'll get this done for you by the end of the week." And then I emailed him once I found out that I was going to be off for this dental surgery. It'll be a couple of days later. I have the surgery, and then I'm going to take some time off, and then I'll get your work done right after that. Didn't go over too well. So he really went off. It was one of those emails, it's all by email. Lots of caps and exclamation points and unprofessional and all this kind of stuff going on. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time when I was telling him, "Oh yeah, I'll be a couple of days late." And I thought he'd understand just because I have this doctor's appointment, it's something that I can't work, when I'm all, had all the surgery done on myself. I found his emails very harsh, probably a little bit unjustified in the sense on how harsh it was and the language he was using. But his disappointment was really justified. It's something that was a justified thing in how disappointed he was that I wasn't fulfilling my obligations of what I said. Why wasn't I as good as my word? I said I'd have it done by the end of the week, and why isn't that happening? And I learned from this is something that I continually remind myself of, even though it was years and years ago, is whenever I say, "Yeah, I'll have it done by Tuesday or Wednesday or Friday or whatever when I'm at my job or in any other situation," that I actually get it done. You kind of weigh your words when you're saying that. If you're saying you're going to have it done by this day, make sure you can have it done by that day. To the best, again, of our abilities. We learned today, we start at 10:15. Usually we say we're going to start at 10:15, but because we didn't have keys and there's a whole bit of an issue, we started a bit later. But, our effort is there to try to fulfill our obligations to the best of our abilities. And, again, I learned that if I say I'm going to do it, I do it. That's something that I always try to stress with myself and with other people. Because at the time, it was starting to slip. I was starting to get a little bit more flippant in my obligations. I didn't really think people worried about it if it was a day or two late, but it really does matter. Sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of the time it does. They set their schedules based on mine, so it's something that is really important. And really, my word should have been good enough. He shouldn't have to say, and in our situations, people shouldn't have to say, "Do you really mean that?" Like when you say, "I'll have it done by this day," do you really mean it? Are you sure? That shouldn't have to happen. It's something that we should be as good as our word. And that's what's happening in the next section on the Sermon on the Mount, is what Jesus is talking about. We've been going through, this is a series on the Sermon on the Mount and what Jesus is teaching. We saw how the Beatitudes of the first section was dealing with the blessings of the citizens of the kingdom. He continues to talk about citizens of the kingdom. We know the kingdom is those people who have accepted Jesus on as their Lord and he reigns in their life. The kingdom is represented by the church at the time. The members of his kingdom are those people who are a part of the church. And the way that we act is a reflection on the kingdom. We are a part of that kingdom, and the things that we do have an influence on people. So he talks in the next section about salt and light, how we are the salt of the light, or salt of the earth and light of the world. We influence the people around us. And then he continues to go on and talks about how our righteousness, the righteousness of the citizens of the kingdom, should exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees and scribes that lived during that day. During that time, those people were the pillars of the religious and the Jewish religion at that time. And it probably was a bit of surprise for Jesus to be teaching that the citizens of the kingdom of the new covenant have to have righteousness that exceeds these people who are considered the righteous people of the time. And for quite a bit of the Sermon on the Mount, which is what we're going through now, is Jesus is comparing the interpretation of the law by the Pharisees and the scribes of the law with what the righteousness of the kingdom should be. These Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law at the time were interpreting the law, the Old Testament, in a certain way which was not correct. They're missing the point in a lot of situations. So we've been going through these sections. We looked at murder and anger. We looked at adultery. We looked at divorce. And now Jesus is talking about oaths and talking about how the scribes and Pharisees interpreted the old law with respect to oaths and how they are teaching this to the people around us, or to around them at the time, and how the citizens of the kingdom have to have a righteousness that surpasses that interpretation of the old law. So we're going to go through this and ask 3 questions through this. The first one we're going to look at is, what did the law of Moses actually teach with respect to the swearing of oaths? In our scripture reading, Jesus says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people of long ago." So again, Jesus is saying, you have heard that it was said. This is what these Pharisees and teachers of the law are teaching with respect to oaths. And in the Old Testament, we'll look and see, what did the law of Moses actually teach with respect to oaths? So we're going to go through a few Old Testament passages and see what the Old Testament actually taught with respect to swearing oaths and saying that you're going to be true to your word. Again, if you're following along, keep your bookmark in Matthew 5. We're going to be coming back to that. But let's go to Leviticus 19. We're going to go to a few Old Testament books. And these passages really are very clear of what the Old Testament teaches with respect to oaths. And it really shows where the emphasis is when you are swearing an oath under the old law. Leviticus 19, we'll look at verse 12. So Leviticus 19 and verse 12. It says, "Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." So again, here he's saying, don't make oaths that you don't mean. You know, your oath is an important thing. So again, that idea of don't swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord. Make sure that when you make an oath, it's important. It's something that you are going to fulfill. We go to Numbers chapter 30. Try to organize these so you're going ahead in your Bible as you're flipping. So we're going to be going Leviticus, Numbers, and then Deuteronomy. So Numbers 30 and verse 2. There's another one that has the intent of showing that we are to stay true to our oath. So Numbers 30 and verse 2. "When a man makes a vow to the Lord, or takes an oath to oblige himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said." Again, don't break your word. Stay true to your oath. You know, truthfulness is something that really, really matters with respect to oaths. It's something that is core to what you're doing in that respect. Deuteronomy 23 and verse 21. This is one that deals with the speed at which you fulfill your oath. So Deuteronomy 23 and verse 21. "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin." So be quick to fulfill your obligations. You make a vow and make sure you fulfill it. Make sure you get it done. I think that speaks to us as people sometimes, is that we procrastinate. We put things off, and then if it goes long enough, we forget about it. We don't do it anymore. He's saying be quick. You know, you make this oath, make sure you fulfill it quickly and get it done. So in each case in these Old Testament passages, the emphasis was really on truthfulness and faithfulness, saying how if you make an oath, you have to fulfill it. You have to be true to your word. If you go to Psalm 15, you know, a person must be truthful when they swear an oath, and they truly have to mean it. They have to be quick in fulfilling it. They have to make sure that they carry through with what they're going to say quickly so it doesn't get forgotten. And in Psalm 15, we'll look at the first 2 verses. So Psalm 15, verses 1 and 2. Again, this emphasis is on truthfulness in the heart, being honest. So Psalm 15, verses 1 and 2. "Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live in your holy mountain? The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart, Again, that emphasis on truthfulness and faithfulness. Be honest. You're making an oath, fulfill it. Fulfill it quickly. Be honest in fulfilling these vows that you make. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. You make sure you fulfill that truthfully and honestly. So the teaching of the law was very clear. Vows to the Lord should be kept. It should be something that's important to you, and you fulfill it quickly. And truthfulness in all things was expected. It's something that God expected of the people who are following the Old Testament. He expects it of his followers. So this goes into our second question. How had the Jews, and in particular the Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law at that time, how had they traditionally interpreted and applied this law? We saw that truthfulness was very important, but how did they interpret it? How did they apply it? This is where we go back to Matthew chapter 5. We'll look at verses 34 to 36. So Jesus initially said, you have heard that it was said, when you follow an oath, you have to make sure you fulfill it. And that's very true. But where were these Jews and teachers of the law, the Pharisees, really putting the emphasis at that time? We'll see a bit of an insight on this in these next few verses. So again, verses 34, and we'll read to verse 36, Matthew 5. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. So their emphasis appeared to have shifted from truthfulness in all things to really just honoring those vows that are to the Lord. They took that idea of saying, if you're fulfilling a vow, or you make a vow with respect to God, you say, I swear on the Lord's name, or I swear on the temple, or whatever they're swearing to, that's the only thing that they have to follow. That's the only thing that they're going to have to do. Whenever else they're talking, it doesn't really count because they didn't swear an oath. So they kind of forgot that truthfulness side of things and really just focused in on whenever you make an oath, that's what you follow. If you go to Matthew 23, we can see an example of this distinction between binding and non-binding oaths with respect to the Pharisees and scribes of the time, where they really show how they're following some oaths sometimes and other oaths other times, and they had these rules with respect to oaths. So Matthew 23 and verses 16 to 19. So Matthew 23, starting in verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides. So the blind guides of the Pharisees and the scribes of the time. You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes that gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes that gift sacred? You can see from this example that they're really missing the point in making oaths. They're not focusing on the truthfulness of things, of actually just being honest. They're making these distinctions. If you swear by the temple, don't worry about that one. You don't have to be truthful in that case because that's not binding. But if you swear by the gold of the temple, then yeah, you got to follow that one. That's the one you really got to follow. So they're putting more emphasis, on the gold and the gifts rather than the actual things that make the gold and the gifts sacred, which is God. And they're not putting the emphasis on being truthful. That's the point that they were missing at the time. That was their interpretation of the old law, and that's what they were focusing on when teaching the Jewish people of the time. They're shifting the emphasis from truthfulness to honoring only those vows that are made to God, only those vows that they deemed as being worthy of being followed in this example here. They're missing the point in this whole situation. So that leads us to our third question. What did Jesus teach in response of this, essentially abuse of the law concerning oaths? So what is Jesus teaching in contrast to this? He's saying that the Jewish people, the Pharisees at the time, they're putting the emphasis on the vow and not actually being truthful. So what is Jesus saying that the citizens of the kingdom have to follow? If we continue reading in Matthew 23, we'll look at verses 20 to 22. So Matthew 23, starting in verse 20. Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and the one who sits on it. So here it shows that one who swears by the temple or the throne of God is actually swearing by the Lord. It's something that we have to involve God in this when you're making any sort of oath, and because of that, it has to be a truthful oath. He's exposing this hypocrisy that they made in making kind of arbitrary decisions as to which oaths to follow and which ones they shouldn't be following or that don't need to follow. When really, any oath is to the Lord. There should be no distinction between oaths. Truthfulness is required in all situations. Whenever you say, yes, I swear to this or that, regardless of what you're swearing to, you have to understand that you're swearing to God, and it's something that you shouldn't be making a distinction to follow this one or that one. You go back to Matthew 5, go back a few chapters. Jesus is also teaching the same thing in this passage, saying you can't swear by these things without involving God in this. The item itself doesn't really matter. It's the idea of if you make an oath, you're swearing this to God, and you must be truthful in these situations. So back to Matthew 5. We'll look at verses 34 to 36 again. So Matthew 5, verse 34. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. So heaven is the throne of God. Earth is his footstool. Really, whatever you're swearing by is something that is to the Lord and must be honored or followed. You can't make these distinctions between swearing on this or that. This one you have to follow, this one you don't. You must be truthful in all situations. And again, I like this, how only God can change your hair color. I'm experiencing this now. I'm getting older, so whenever my hair is long enough to see it, you can see that it's starting to get gray. It's happening. Unless you're dyeing your hair, we can change our hair color in that respect. But truthfully and biologically, only God can change that hair color. It's the only thing that he can do, and we can't. Any oath is an oath to the Lord. Any oath is an oath to God, and all of them must be kept. And instead of making meaningless oaths, Jesus teaches that truthfulness in all situations is what really matters. And that's what's in harmony with the law. So back in Matthew 5, we'll look at verse 37. This is where it really gets down to the crux of what he's saying in this passage. Matthew 5, verse 37. It says, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And let your yes be yes, let your no be no. That truthfulness, like we saw in Psalm, has to come from the heart. It's something that's within us. We're always truthful in all situations. And citizens of the kingdom, their righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees who are making these distinctions between oaths and forgot about this idea of having a heart of truthfulness. Anything more than this is evil, and it's contrary to speaking this truth in your heart. You must always follow those oaths and always be truthful in all situations, and stop making these kind of meaningless, flippant oaths. Again, that's when I think back to my time when I was making these deadlines with clients and kind of not really putting a lot of weight on it. Just thinking, yeah, everybody knows that it may be this day or that day, and nobody's really worried about it. And I was kind of losing the point of just being truthful. If you say you're going to do it, you must do it. It's possible to make oaths by emphasizing this truthfulness, depending on the situation. That's one thing that sometimes this passage can be misread in a sense, where it's saying, do not swear an oath at all. Does that mean that we're forbidden to swear an oath in any situation? That's not really the emphasis here. If you go to Hebrews 6, the intent here in this passage is to condemn the situations where the only time that you're truthful is when you're making an oath. Or if you have certain oaths, if you swear on a certain thing, that's the one that you're actually going to follow through with. But if you swear on something else, you're not going to follow that. This is really what he's condemning, is these kind of flippant oaths that don't mean anything. We can see some examples in the New Testament of this idea of emphasizing truthfulness. And that's okay to do. It's okay to say, yes, I really mean it when the situation calls for it. The idea is that we must be truthful in all situations. One example is in Hebrews 6. We'll look at verses 16 to 17. And this is where God has sworn an oath to us. He said to us as citizens of the kingdom that he really is being truthful in this sense, so that we can really understand and rely on him. Hebrews 6, verses 16 and 17. It says, people swear by something greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to all argument. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised. He confirmed it with an oath, So in this passage, through the book of Hebrews, God is emphasizing that his promise can be relied on. And he's doing this because the situation called for it. He's saying, yes, you guys can really rely on this. The book of Hebrews is written to the Jewish people and really trying to convince them that the new covenant coming into play is a fulfillment of the old law. And so the whole book of Hebrews is really talking about proving the new covenant that Jesus is the Messiah of. And he's emphasizing in this passage that his promise can be relied upon. It's something he can use as a hope, this hope he can have as an anchor to your soul. He's emphasizing that it can be relied on, that Jesus is the Messiah, and if we're obedient to that covenant, we are going to be with him in heaven. He's saying this is going to happen, and I've confirmed this with an oath. The situation called for it. Another example is from Paul. You go to Galatians 1. It's another example where Paul emphasizes the truthfulness of his statements. So Galatians 1 and verse 20. Galatians is a letter that he's written to the Galatian church. He's giving them instructions. In doing that as well, through example, he's telling us what we can do in this passage. And in Galatians 1 and verse 20, he's emphasizing this truthfulness to the people that are reading it. So Galatians 1 and verse 20. I assure you before God that what I am writing to you, or that I am writing you, is no lie. Again, emphasizing the truthfulness. The situation called for it. So it's not wrong to do that. It's not wrong to say, yes, I am going to do this. I promise I'm going to do this. It's okay to emphasize that truthfulness. Really what Jesus is teaching in his passages is that all we need to say simply is yes or no. Like if the situation calls for it and you're going to say, yes, I promise, then that's fine. But all you need to say is yes or no. Your word should be good enough. If you say you're going to do something, you should do it, and it should be relied upon. A similar passage is in James chapter 5. You go to James 5. There's another passage where this idea of them saying do not swear by anything is qualified by James to refer to that same kind of meaningless oaths of not being truthful. James 5 and verse 12. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Jesus and James in these passages are really condemning being flippant with these oaths and picking and choosing when you're going to be truthful based on what you say. That's going against that whole idea of being true in your heart, being truthful, being honest people with integrity. And that's the righteousness that he demands from the citizens of the kingdom, which exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees at the day, where they were teaching that all you need to follow is oaths in certain times. They're missing this point of being truthful at all times. The things where we're emphasizing truthfulness is okay, but we have to understand that when we say we're going to do something, all we simply need to say is yes or no. You don't really need to say an oath because we're truthful all the time. That's the righteousness he demands. Citizens of the kingdom are to be truthful and trustworthy. We should not need to swear oaths or say, I promise, or I really mean it this time, to be trusted. Anytime we say things, big or small, our yes should be yes and our no should be no, regardless of the situation. And again, to the best of our ability, there's things that happen out of our control, that happen sometimes that we miss, where we can't fulfill those obligations. But the idea is that we are to be sincere, we're to be truthful, to do all we can in all of these situations, to be honest and do our best to act with that integrity and follow our word. And can this be said of us? Are we as good as our word all the time? Is our righteousness exceeding that of the Pharisees and scribes of the law at the time of Jesus' day? When we say we'll do something, is that as good as it's done? Is that something that we can be relied upon for it? That is the righteousness that Jesus demands of the citizens of the kingdom. I'd like to offer that invitation if you've not yet accepted Jesus on as your Lord, if you've not yet accepted the citizenship in the kingdom, we can show you in the scriptures how to do that. God has given us everything that we need to know in the scriptures. We follow what he's laid out in the scriptures, and we can accept this gift that's been offered to anybody in the world. We can show you how to do that in the scriptures. And if you are struggling in any way, you can make your needs known, and we'd love to help in any way that we can.